Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Who are you?
Whoa, hey.
What do you want?
I'm looking for Beatrice Beauchamp.
Do you have any papers? A birth certificate?
Irene, there's no need for that. I think I know my own son.
I took a ride out past the monastery today. It's very odd. One of the young monks there looks exactly like me.
What's the matter with you lately? You have to learn the difference between boredom and contemplation.
I have a twin.
He only takes pictures of himself. Who does that? Come with me.
It's not right. And what we just did is? That's different. We're family.
Well, hello and welcome to the Peccadillo Sofa Club. I'm David McGillivray. We're live on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. And tonight, my guest on the sofa is one of cinema's great iconoclasts. I've been following his career for about 30 years now. You just saw a trailer for his new film, SAINT-NARCISSE. I'm pretty convinced it's the best film he's ever made. Now, having seen that trailer, or maybe you've seen the film itself, it's now on peccadillopod.com. Oh, let me just check the price. Oh, is it that cheap? What a bargain. Having seen that, you may want to ask the director a question. It's very, very simple. Depending on the device you're using, the comments box is either underneath or to the side of this image. Just type your question in there. And at this juncture, I would normally say, we'll try and answer it as long as it's not obscene. But
oh, come on, we can answer the obscene ones too.
Tonight, I don't think that's going to be an issue, but questions are filtered. Please, will you say hello to the very wonderful and very outrageous Bruce LaBruce?
Hey, everybody. Greetings from Toronto.
Oh, I was just going to say, I'm in London, UK. You are in your hometown then?
Yes, indeed. Last time I talked to you, I was in Buenos Aires.
That was tremendously exciting. You're referring to the time when your film opened here in London at the ICA cinema. We met virtually. I was in the cinema. But yes, you were in Argentina. Why?
I was at the BAFICI, the Buenos Aires International Independent Film Festival, showing another film of mine, which just came out recently, The Affairs of Lydia, which is a porn film and made for Erica Lust. And I was also on a jury there and did a master class. So it was fun.
We may come back to the subject of that film, The Affairs of Lydia, because I want to know more about it. But let's return to that night at the ICA. We talked after the film virtually, so you won't know what I said when I introduced the film. So I can tell you now that I told the packed house that the film had just won a prize at Venice in 2020. But I was drawn to the film before I saw it by the headline of a review on IMDb, which said, bad, but entertaining. And I had a feeling you probably wouldn't mind that remark.
That seems like a pretty basic kind of remark. I mean, what does that even mean? You know, bad, everyone knows that bad can be entertaining. I don't think this, you know, quite often people use certain things to dismiss my films because they don't want to actually deal with what I'm talking about or the implications of what I'm talking about. So quite often in the past, I've said, "Oh, it's just not very well made." It's like it's shoddy, it's sloppy, it's no production values. I've had many reviews like somebody should give Bruce LaBruce another $1.95 to make another movie. It sounds like it was shot in a snowstorm and recorded in a tin can. That kind of review. In fact, once in the New York Post, for one of my movies, Super 8.5, I got a -0, a below zero rating. It was Super 8. The headline was Super 8.5 in negative numbers. So, so it's easy to dismiss a film on that level. So lately, when I've been making bigger budgeted films with impeccable kind of like cinematography and really beautiful kind of like sound design and everything, then there's no longer that excuse to dismiss, although they still manage to, and not really deal with what the film is actually talking about. Yeah. So as you know, I have a special fetish for mine, as you've just heard, for my bad reviews. They're the ones that stick in my mind.
We all always remember those. Well, I'm fairly sure it's a masterpiece, but will you grant me that, as I said to you before, in April, a lot of people will not be quite sure what to make of the film because it's difficult to categorize.
Well, I mean, it isn't. It isn't. If you look at it as a genre film, it's easier to categorize because it is kind of my homage to Quebecois, French Canadian cinema from the early 70s. And not only that, but films from that era, which is my favorite era of filmmaking. So late 60s, right up until 1980, that sweet spot there when everything was a bit more revolutionary, a little more, as you said, iconoclastic people, questioning conventions of cinema, of social and political categories. So, and this film references films from that era. So it references The Fox, the film with Sandy Dennis by Mark Rydell, about two lesbians living in the woods who are disrupted by a heterosexual woodsman and kind of like threatens their relationship, based on a D.H. Lawrence story. So that's one of the big influences on the film. And how do you categorize that film? I mean, it's kind of a lesbian film out of its that was in some ways way ahead of its time. And then also Robert Altman's film Images, which came out in '74, about a schizophrenic woman who has a doppelganger, so played by Suzanne York. So I was heavily referencing that. Those films, not only stylistically, but in terms of the music, in terms of the tone of the film. In fact, we used music from both of those films as temp tracks when we were editing the film, yeah, it's and then Quebecois films like the films of Paul Almond with Isabelle, with his wife at the time, Geneviève Bujold. So Act of the Heart in particular was a film that I saw on Canadian TV when I was a teenager. It's about a priest who ends up having sex with a young girl on the altar of the church, and then she goes to the park at the end of the film and douses herself with gasoline and sets herself on fire as the final credits roll. So that was a reference as well. So if you think about those films, that's the kind of category that SAINT-NARCISSE is in.
Well, just to be clear, it includes everything, as we expect from you, Bruce, from bloody murder and hot sex to monks playing volleyball. But can I ask you about the initial spark? What was that? Was it the Narcissus myth?
Quite often my starting point for making films is a fetish. So the fetish of twincest was what I was initially thinking of. Twincest porn has always fascinated me. It's a kind of strange taboo where it's almost like the most socially accepted form of incest, if there is one. It's the one kind of type of incest that people kind of like scratch their heads over and go, well, if I was presented with a doppelganger of myself, like a kind of clone of myself, and had intimate access to that person, would there be some kind of sexual attraction? Would there be some temptation? So it is a very well-defined porn genre with actual twins having sex in porn. And I initially, my idea was to try to find twins to star in the movie, real twins. And in fact, I have to say we did such a good job with the special effects that some people, after seeing the film, asked me if they actually were played by twins or by two different actors. Some people think they were twins. So
I'm so glad you mentioned this, Bruce, because again, harking back to that screening in April, I was delighted when there was a question from the audience, and the man said that he didn't realize until the credits rolled that your two leading characters were played by the same actor. So can you reveal all now? Was it camera trickery, doubles, or both?
well, it was camera trickery and doubles, but it was very basic, kind of like special effects that have been around since The Parent Trap with Haley Mills, and which was another actually reference for the film.
I'm sure.
In that film, the twins change places and go to each other's families in order to kind of like, they have this plot where they're trying to get their parents back together. And it's kind of similar in my film, where the twins at the end change places and in order to reunite the family. But yeah, it's there's, and I looked, of course, at David Cronenberg's great film Dead Ringers, and how he did the effects. And split screen is a easy technique to do. Even before digital effects, you could do it with optical effects. And body doubles is tricky. You have to make sure that you have a body double who is as close as possible to your main actor. And we did use only about, I would say, 7 or 8 CGI effects, so digital effects. So when they're riding on the motorcycle at the end, or certain scenes where you can see the face of the actor in the same frame as the other actor. So, but we tried to keep it as limited as possible. We wanted to kick it old school, and we also wanted to be more true to the era of the 70s. And the other thing that a lot of people say when they see the movie is, or not a lot, but I had people say to me, was this film actually made in the 70s? they thought I like digged it up or dug it up from an archive or something. So
it is set in 1972. So that's the next question. Why that year?
I mean, almost coincidentally, I guess I was thinking about the idea of the Polaroid and when what were the selfies of the 70s, and of course the Polaroid is probably one prototype. And actually, the camera that I used in the film, the SX70, came out in the year 72 and was very popular. It became a kind of a craze. Not only to have that kind of immediate photo develop in front of you, which is analogous to selfies now, where you look at them immediately and see yourself. But also just the portability of it, and the kind of it was also aesthetically very pleasing, the flattering kind of the Polaroid. So that was part of it. Part of it, as I said, was the era of filmmaking. It's kind of a death of the 60s movie, where there was this kind of idealistic sexual revolution in the 60s, and then by the end of the 60s and early 70s. There was a lot of disillusionment. There was a lot of consequences that happened after the era of complete, questioning all the rules of sexual behavior and everything. So, in a good way, I think it challenged the conventions, sexual conventions of culture. But there was a lot of fallout from it, and people had to kind of reimagine and exactly what it meant to be in a family, or question the roles of the family, the father, the mother. It was just before the gay liberation movement, so people were also questioning, the supremacy of the nuclear family, and how, if there's other options that people could explore. So it's a film that is right on the precipice of a lot of changes in culture and era.
It's a very beautiful film indeed to look at, and I'd like you to tell me about your relationship with your director of photography, Michel Laveau. First time you've worked together?
Yeah, first time we worked together, and I chose him in particular because he's been around for a long time, and he's worked with a lot of the filmmakers, Quebecois filmmakers that I'm referencing in the film. He's been making films since the 70s, so he knew exactly what I wanted in terms of the look of the film, the aesthetic of the film. He used a camera package that was consistent with the one that he would have used back in the day, a lighting kit, lenses from that era. We had these two gorgeous long zoom lenses that we used a lot, that are not as popular as they were back then. There's a lot of zooms in the film. So yeah, and also just the sensibility he really got. He's also a huge fan, as I am, of films like Fassbinder films, films from the European kind of films from the 70s as well, the German New Wave. So, and he's just a super cinephile. I mean, he and I can just sit and talk. He's a huge Bordeaux fan. He favors like very expensive Bordeaux wine. So whenever I go to Montreal, we sit and he buys a couple of bottles of Bordeaux, and we sit and talk about movies and cinema, the history of cinema, directors. We really click on that level. I should say though, he also is it was a bit of a trial by fire working with him as well, because he's a very kind of meticulous cinematographer, and he, his lighting is very precise, and you don't fuck around with his lighting. I mean, but other things like camera placement and just in general kind of working. The first week, it was kind of like he was testing me a lot. He was like making sure I knew what I was doing, and he was really. So there were a couple of incidents where one of us would, where he would like kind of like tell me to fuck off and leave the set, and I'd be, is this normal? And but then he'd always come back within 5 minutes, and we'd carry on. But then after that initial kind of trial by fire period, we totally got along like gangbusters.
Good. I'm glad you're still friends. Now, I introduced you as the outrageous Bruce LaBruce. I have a feeling, and this is a film about, as you say, a twin cest. And at the end of the film, when Cy and the family Stone sing "Family Affair," I laughed. Now, is that allowable?
Of course. I mean, the film has a strong camp kind of element to it. Although I do subscribe to the idea that camp is best played straight. So I had the actors play it, it's very melodramatic, the situations that they find themselves in, but I had them play them, dramatically, how they would in any serious drama, and so some of the lines are kind of over the top, and but they just the point is to just not signal to the audience that that it's ironic, or that the line might be a little ripe. It's like to just really to just play it like dramatically straight out, which is what they all did marvelously, I think. I mean, Andreas Apergy, who plays Father Andrew, at the end, he really gets to sink his teeth into some high camp moments where he's really, when he's like getting high and drinking and kind of like going into some kind of religious ecstasy, and kind of losing track of reality and not knowing which twin is which and what is real and what isn't. He got a chance to chew the scenery, as they say, a little bit there, which is perfectly, he hit the tone perfectly that I want to, because it's such a preposterous situation at the end that it could only be played with that kind of amount of serious cant.
It's a wonderful climax, and I love. I'm hoping I'm going to be able to pronounce this name correctly. Andreas Apergis.
I think it's probably his Apergis. He's Greek. Yeah.
Well, he is splendidly sinister, and I think that as a result of your film, Bruce, he's going to get more offers of horror films.
Well, that very final expression of his at the very end, when the other monk comes in and finds him at the feet of San Sebastian, and he turns him over, and and he has this. It's a spoiler, but I'm sure.
Yes, spoiler alert here.
Yeah.
For those who haven't seen the film, yes.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop you there, Bruce.
Okay. So anyway, there was a particular expression I wanted on his face, and even though we had a pretty decent budget for the film, we shot it in like 22 days or something. It was very brisk pace, and so we didn't have a lot of takes, and he did it maybe three times or four times, and I said, okay, he just didn't quite get it, and then he really kind of like thought about it, and on the last take he really nailed that final expression, which kind of really summarizes what the movie is about, that intersection of religious and sexual ecstasy.
I'm David McGillivray, and I'm here with Bruce LaBruce on the Peccadillo Sofa Club, and we're talking about his film SAINT-NARCISSE, which is now on peccadillopod.com. If you'd like to ask Bruce anything about this film, or indeed his whole career, you know what to do. Just type that question in the little box, which might be underneath this image or to the side. Hashtag Peccadillo Sofa Club, I've just been reminded. Bruce, I want to take you back now to the beginning of your career. And as I say, I saw your earliest films about 30 years ago. And one of them was called Super 8½, and it was shown here in London at the National Film Theatre. You were there as well. I was there. And I remember that you said after the film that your ambition, and this is when your career had just started, was to mix porn and art. Now, I think you've achieved that ambition. How are you? Are you happy with the balance of art and porn in SAINT-NARCISSE?
I don't consider SAINT-NARCISSE a porn film in any way. And like I said, I have another film that's come out almost simultaneously, The Affairs of Lydia, that was made for Erica Luss Company, which is definitely a porn film, although we made a softcore version, which I'm showing at festivals. And you can really, and this is a question I get time and time again. It's an age-old question. How do you tell a porn? What makes a porn, And one of the most famous responses, I don't know who to attribute it to. Some people attribute it to me, but I didn't say it first. That it's the lighting. You know, you can tell by the lighting, which is a rule of thumb. You know, but now you have such a thing called elevated porn. You know, and you always have had it, even back in the 70s, with high production values, and kind of if you didn't know it was a porn and you walked into the theater at a certain point, it would just look like a regular, a well-made regular film. It's just then you get into other things like the kind of the tone of the film, or the balance, like how much sex is there in the film? Are the sex scenes kind of extended? Do they go on for in a way, if they go on for an uncomfortably long time in the cinema, then you could argue it takes you out of the story, and that it interferes with the flow of the film. So that's one reason I've always made softcore versions to show of a lot of my films, to show theatrically or at festivals, because to show the entire hardcore film is not is not kind of compatible with the usual way that the films are watched and kind of appreciated. So there's that. Super 8.5 was very much a film about porn, about it was an art film about a washed up porn star. And the reason that porn star was washed up, and director, was because people started taking him seriously as an artist, and it gave him a artistic block, and he could no longer make porn movies anymore because he was labeled an artist, which I thought was an interesting kind of dialectic that has kind of followed me through my entire career as well. But I just continue to make both. I insist on kind of making both because there is this kind of like some kind of expectation that at a certain point you put away childish things, or you put away your youth and your indiscretions of youth and making porn, and you make more serious films, and or more commercial films, or more films with bigger budgets or whatever. And it's like, well, why can't you can do both? I mean, if you want to, you certainly can do both.
But where
Well, they don't let everyone do it, but they let me do it.
But where SAINT-NARCISSE is concerned, Bruce, opinions about porn seem to differ. Now, what would you say if I used the phrase shadow banning?
Yes. Well, that's the thing. We found out recently that that SAINT-NARCISSE was removed from streaming on Amazon Prime. It had been streaming for 6 months on Amazon Prime in the States, and also in France. And then when Peccadillo applied, submitted it for streaming in the UK, it was rejected, as I understand, on the grounds. And then I don't know exactly if this was the cause. I think it probably is, because it's too much of a coincidence. At the same time, they removed it from streaming in the US and France. So with the only explanation being offensive content. So I don't know how something could be like viewed for a half a year and seen by thousands of people, and then suddenly be deemed inappropriate and offensive, unless there was some a tidal wave of complaints or something, or who knows these days. I mean, it could be one complaint. You don't know. They don't give you any explanation beyond that. There's no accountability on their part in terms of that. So, and I know Peccadillo had other titles with similar problems, like John Cameron Mitchell's Short Bus. So, but I think one person told me, and for a small film and for an independent filmmaker, this kind of thing makes a big difference. It's you want the film to be seen as widely as possible, and anything like this really really hurts the film, you know. And
Sure.
so
Bruce, we've just had a very relevant question from Marky. Is there anything that you would truly consider offensive content?
um well, if you're talking about on Amazon Prime, I mean, one person said to me recently, there was an episode of The Boys, the TV series The Boys recently, where a superhero who goes down to microscopic size goes into a character's penis, I believe, and then kind of blows, and then expands himself and blows up the character while he's inside or something. So, I mean, um, I wasn't offended by that. I wasn't offended by the image of a little superhero going into another man's penis. So, and I don't even have I have no one going into someone's penis in my movie, you know. So you just see a penis in my movie that isn't even hard. So uh, I think it's pretty hard to. What I find more offensive is maybe, for example, something like the fact that you can go on Instagram Live, you know, any day of any hour of the day and see someone getting shot in the head. I mean, whether or not that should be allowed or not is another question, and I'm pretty much in a lot of ways a free speech absolutist, but the fact that I think that extreme violence is arguably more quote unquote offensive than sex. So, and there's always been that double standard, and I'm not sure why it exists.
Mm-hmm. Of course. Now, we are talking about your earlier films, Super 8.5, and George asks this. I first discovered you when I watched Otto. That's another of my favorites of yours, Bruce, and I originally thought you were German. Then I went on to find that your work is almost global. What inspires your location choices? I think this may have something to do with your former collaboration with Jürgen Brüning, the former head of the Katzo porn company in Berlin.
Yes. I guess it was almost serendipitous that, yeah, Jürgen was visiting from Berlin in Buffalo, which is near New York, as a visiting curator, and he would come to Toronto to scout for work and to show at Hallwalls in Buffalo, and this institutional art center. And he showed my work, and we started up a lifelong collaboration where he's produced many of my films, not SAINT-NARCISSE and Gerontophilia, which were made in Quebec, but so that's part of it. I started going to Berlin in 1990, just as the wall was going down, and because Jürgen and I had gained reputations as being pornographers, even though we considered ourselves artists who were making films with explicit sex in them, we got that reputation, and so we fulfilled that reputation. And he started the first ever porn company in Berlin. I started directing films for his company in Berlin, and I've made, I think, 6 or 7 films in Berlin, in Germany, one in Hamburg and one outside of Berlin, and about 5 in Berlin. So that's part of it. Also, after Super 8.5, I was really getting into a lot of trouble in Toronto. This was in 1993, 94, where the labs were calling the police on me, the film labs and the photography labs where I got my film developed were I was on their radar for sure. People were saying, "Oh, if he brings his film into the lab, don't develop it. You could be liable for, you know, criminal prosecution and things like that." So I thought it would be a good time to get out of town, you know. So I moved to LA for a year and made a movie called Hustler White. So I've made 2 films in LA, another one in 2010 called LA Zombie. So I am a bit of a, you know, international filmmaker in that respect. I love making films in other cities. I've shot short films in like places like in Paris and Nashville, and I've shot scenes. Part of Skin Flick was shot in London. I've shot scenes from Super 8.5 were shot in New York. I've shot, and then now I've shot 2 films in Quebec. So some people think I'm German, and because of my name, LaBruce, some people think I'm French.
Well,
But
you just mentioned Hustler White, and I'd like to talk to you about how you choose your leading players. Now, do you get into your head, somebody I'd like to work with, and then just phone them up? Because in Hustler White, you were working with the internationally famous model Tony Ward. How does it happen?
Well, that's a funny story because, I mean, just a bit of background. Usually I make, super low budget, no budget films. So I quite often just use people that I know. Traditionally, I've used people that I know, that I meet. There's no official, I don't go through official casting agents and all that when I'm making a guerrilla style film. With Hustler White, we had this idea. We wanted to make it very authentic to the male prostitution scene on Santa Monica Boulevard in LA, which we were kind of documenting its last gasp. It was just, street prostitution was dying. The police were running them all off the street. So we wanted to cast an actual hustler in the main role, and indeed a lot of the other actors in the film are actual hustlers, and a few porn stars, people kind of playing themselves. So we did have a hustler. One of the other actors in the film, Glenn Meadmore, who's a friend, who's a singer. He's a born again Christian country and western singer, even though he's not born again Christian himself. He had a hustler living with him named Monty, who we cast originally in the role. And 3 weeks before shooting, Monty took off with all of Glenn's a musician, with all his equipment, his guitars, his speakers, his car. He kind of wiped him out. And so we thought, I don't think he's going to be very reliable for the role of Montgomery Ward. That's why it's called Monty, though, in the film, because the original hustler we were going to cast was named Monty. And we had considered Tony Ward before this, and stupidly, I was like, "Oh, he's too old. He's too old for the role," which was ridiculous. And I was too young for my role, and that didn't seem to make a difference. And so we approached him with 2 weeks before shooting and asked if he was still interested and available, and he said he was. So the first day of shooting, he was maybe 4 hours late for the first shoot. So we didn't even know on the first day of shooting whether he was going to show up or not. But he did, and then he was totally
worked out in the end. And you've also worked with the nearest thing possible to a porn legend, Francois Saga. Are you likely to work with him again? Does he keep in touch?
I run into, whenever I'm in Paris, we see each other. He's actually not even living in Paris anymore. He lives, I think, somewhere else in France. I worked with him twice, with LA Zombie, and then in a short film I did for Cocky Boys called The Purple Army Factory.
Oh.
And I would definitely work with him again. He's a very creative guy. He's an artist in his own right. He's an actor. He's if you see the content that he makes for social media, it's always extremely inventive, and he's always challenging boundaries as well. He in terms of gender roles or just he did a straight porn, I know, in the recent past. So he's someone I'm always interested in working for. He's kind of like the Marilyn Monroe of porn. When I was making LA Zombie with him in LA, I would walk into a restaurant with him, and he's one of those characters where every head in the room kind of turns and looks at him when he enters a room. He has real star quality.
He does indeed, yes. You just mentioned Cocky Boys, Bruce. It's a porn site.
Company.
You've done some, yes, you've done some very fine work for them. How did it come about?
I think I contacted them initially and proposed to work with them. We were originally going to. I always forget how these things begin and what who approached whom. I know with Erica Lust with Affairs of Lydia, they have definitely approached me and said, well, I'd already done 3 half-hour films with them, and they said, would you like to do a feature film for us? And I, immediately jumped at the chance. But with Cocky Boys, I think I did. I knew someone who was working with them, and I just approached Jake Jackson, the president of the company, and asked if he would like to do something. And then I actually proposed that we do 4 short films, kind of like an omnibus movie. So I wrote 4 different small scripts that were kind of slightly on theme, and shot 2 of them in Madrid and 2 of them in Berlin. It was very and it was very creative, working with really great. I just chose my own cinematographers, people who work in not in porn usually, but just working with creative people that are interested in the idea of porn.
And now, finally, Bruce, let's come back to the film we mentioned right at the top of this show. It's your latest film. It's called The Affairs of Lydia, and your producer is, she's another porn legend, but an avant-garde one. It's Erica Lust. Are you of a like mind?
I wouldn't call her avant-garde, but she's definitely. I mean, her company, Erica Lust Company, is a ethical feminist porn company based in Barcelona, and they do largely narrative-based porn, but also kind of expanding the idea of what a porn movie can be. They do kind of more conceptual kind of stuff as well, which it could be called avant-garde. And believe it or not, I've never met the woman herself. She runs the company. She lives, I think, in France, maybe the south of France, and I've never actually met her. I've just worked with a lot of great people that run the company.
Did you want to work together, or were you put together?
Initially, again, it was a friend of mine who introduced me to the company and their work, and I approached them, and they knew me, of course, by reputation, and they kind of jumped at the chance. But and they actually let me make a gay film called Refugees Welcome, which was the first time I worked with them, and because they're primarily straight, quote unquote, porn company. So it was mutual. I mean, I really like what they were doing. They like my work. It's mutually beneficial. I like the philosophy behind the company, and that's always important.
You've said before, Bruce, that you sometimes make hard and soft versions of your films. There's a hard and soft version of The Affairs of Lydia. Do you know when we can see either of them?
Well, you can already see the hardcore version on the Erica Lust website. I mean, you just have to. It's behind a paywall. You have to become a member of some sort to see it. The softcore version is currently on the festival circuit. So I mentioned I showed it in Buenos Aires. I just showed it in Mexico, at the Guadalajara International Film Festival, and in Puerto Vallarta. It's going to be coming up. It played at the Milano LGBTQI festival recently. So it's going to be playing a bit on the festival circuit. So keep an eye out for it.
We certainly shall. And is it true you're now involved in a documentary about Tony Ward?
I don't know about that, actually. He the pandemic just, blew everything to hell. So I talked to Tony. He called me. I was in Montreal, and I think he was in New York, but he called me and asked me if I would be in the documentary. This is before the pandemic, and I said sure, and they were going to come up to Montreal, but I don't know. The pandemic happened, and I kind of lost track of the thread there. But I would gladly participate. Yes,
and we'd all pay to see it as well, Bruce.
Mm-hmm.
It's been lovely. Thank you so much for joining us on the sofa tonight.
My pleasure. Always a pleasure. Anything for Peccadillo and Tony.
I'll do anything for them as well. SAINT-NARCISSE is now on peccadillopod.com. I think I'm right in saying that a DVD and Blu-ray are imminent, perhaps. Stay in touch with Peccadillo.
Yeah,
it's
please
coming.
do stay. Yeah, and let's hope that Amazon Prime comes up with a better explanation. They say it's under review, but that's under review basically means shadow banned. So
don't get me started on censorship, Bruce. Get yourself together, Amazon. Renewed thanks, Bruce. I have to take my leave now, but we're leaving you with a trailer. It's a trailer for a new Peccadillo release, Boys on Film 22. It's on demand from today, and it's on DVD and Blu-ray from July the 4th. From my very special guest next to me on the sofa, Bruce LaBruce, and from me, David McGillivray.
Hi, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Enjoy the
2, 3, 4. I look at you and I want more.
We are all family here.
Just one more time, please.
It was a political act as well as just a purely sexual act.
Your change is inevitable.
There's a whole world of real men out there.
That was thrilling.
Can I take you for breakfast?
Let's find someplace quieter.
We'll find the freedom that we so desperately need.
Você é do tipo romântico.
Here we go, here we go! I appear to be in love with you.
It is the ultimate connection.